They thought age made her gentle, that time had softened her hands and her heart. But Eleanor Vance knew better, that kindness was simply the mask she wore while waiting for the right moment to serve revenge, sweet and perfectly baked. The scent of cinnamon clung to everything. It lived in the curtains, in the grooves of the old cutting board, in the folds of her apron. It was the smell of her life, sweet, steady, deceitful. Even now, when Eleanor Vance woke before dawn and shuffled into the kitchen, that fragrance met her like an old friend who'd long since turned into an enemy. The clock above the stove ticked in patient rhythm, its sound filling the silence the way a heartbeat fills an empty room. Tick. Tock. Proof that she was still here. Proof that time had not yet decided to stop for her. She poured hot water over a tea bag and watched the steam curl upward, the way ghosts might dance before they vanished. Her hands shook, but not from weakness, from the tremor that came when one had lived too long among memories. Her fingers were thin, veined, mapped with time. They had once been strong enough to knead dough for hours, to shape pastries that made children laugh and lovers forgive each other. Those same hands had buried her husband, her youth, and her peace. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. Frank used to hum in the mornings, his voice deep and warm, the sound of sunlight on wood. He'd been gone 12 years, but sometimes she still turned her head expecting to see him there, wiping flour from his arms, smiling at her over a tray of cooling bread. Outside, autumn pressed against the windows, smearing the glass with fog. Leaves turned to copper, to rust, to death. The world was moving toward winter, and so, she thought, was she. She sat by the window with her tea, the chair creaking like old bones beneath her. From here, she could see across the street, the post office, the flower shop, and the building that used to be hers. Vance's Bakery. Now it bore another name, Sweet Eden Patisserie. The letters gleamed in elegant gold, smug against the gray morning light. The sight of them made something cold stir beneath her ribs. It wasn't anger, not exactly. Anger was hot and fast. This was slower, older, the sort of bitterness that seeps into the bloodstream and stays there. That building had once been her life's work. 40 years of mornings before dawn. 40 years of warm bread, laughter, and small-town kindness. The bakery had been the heartbeat of Rosehill, until they came. The Langleys. Abigail with her red lipstick and rehearsed warmth, Martin with his calculating silence. They'd come smiling, promising partnership, progress, modernity. They'd spoken of branding and expansion, words that tasted like metal in Eleanor's mouth. But Frank had been coughing then, and the hospital bills had come like wolves. She had believed their kindness, signed their papers. Within months, the locks were changed. The name Vance was scraped off the window, and the townspeople, the ones who'd once called her our sweet Mrs. Vance, lined up outside Sweet Eden as if nothing had changed at all. That was 11 years ago, yet the memory felt as sharp as a blade pressed to her palm. She took another sip of tea. It had gone cold. In the cupboard above the stove sat an old leather-bound book, her recipe journal, the one Frank had bought her when they first opened the bakery in 1974. The cover was scarred, the pages yellowed, sugar-stained, and still faintly smelled of vanilla and almonds. She brought it down, feeling its weight in her hands. Her fingers found the familiar pages: lemon loaf for the fair, Frank's toffee custard, Christmas brioche. Each recipe was a piece of her, a language she no longer spoke but could never forget. At the back of the book were blank pages. Empty. Waiting. Eleanor sat down at the kitchen table and opened to the very last one. The pen felt strange between her fingers, as though it belonged to someone younger. She hesitated, then began to write. Not ingredients. Not instructions. Names. Abigail Langley. Martin Langley. Harold Brinley. Beatrice Horn. She paused after each one, tasting the shape of it in her mind. The banker who'd pushed the sale through. The critic who'd called her baking quaint. The couple who'd stolen her life and smiled while doing it. When she finished, she looked at the list for a long while. Then, slowly, she underlined the first name, Abigail Langley, and wrote beneath it, Some recipes take years to perfect. She closed the book, her pulse steady. The kitchen seemed to breathe around her, the faint creak of wood, the sigh of the wind against the window, the heartbeat of the ticking clock. Frank's photograph sat on the mantel, his smile caught forever in a moment of light and flower dust. "Don't look at me like that, Frank," she whispered. "You always said kindness was my strength. Maybe it was my weakness instead." Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. She stood and moved to the stove, where an old copper pot sat waiting. Her reflection looked back at her in its curved surface, line faded, but steady. "They think I've softened," she murmured. "They think age has turned me harmless." She ran her fingers along the edge of the pot, feeling the ghost of her younger hands there, the woman who once made sweetness her art, her offering to the world. But sweetness, she decided, could be sharpened. The smell of cinnamon deepened in the air, heady and nostalgic, and she realized how easily scent could deceive, how warmth could hide the taste of something bitter. Eleanor turned off the lamp, letting the room sink into half-darkness. The last light caught the edge of the recipe book on the table, a small glimmer like an ember refusing to die. Outside, the leaves whispered against the glass, and the clock continued its tireless ticking. She smiled, small, secret, dangerous. "Patience," she said softly to the silence. "That's all baking ever was." And somewhere deep within her, beneath the years and the dust and the ache of old bones, something began to rise. Morning came pale and thin, slipping through the lace curtains like hesitant forgiveness. Eleanor woke to the creak of her own bones, the sound of rain against the roof, and the faint scent of flour that seemed embedded in the walls. No matter how many times she scrubbed this house, flour remained, a white ghost refusing to leave. She moved through the kitchen slowly, her slippers whispering across the tiles. The clock above the stove kept its faithful vigil. Tick. Tock. Each sound an accusation. Each second a reminder that time was still passing, even if she wasn't. On the table sat the recipe book. She hadn't meant to leave it out, but somehow, she'd known she would. It looked harmless there, a relic of gentler years. Yet she could feel the weight of what was written inside, the ink still drying where she had listed their names. A ledger of debts, measured not in money, but in pain. She opened it again, fingertips brushing the paper. The sight of those names stirred something low and cold within her, not fury, exactly, but a solemn clarity. She had never believed in divine justice. God had been silent when Frank coughed blood into his handkerchief, silent when the Langleys took her life's work, silent when her own hands began to tremble too much to pipe icing straight. If justice existed, it would have to wear her face. Outside, the world dripped. Rain fell in slow sheets, turning the cobblestones of Rosehill Lane slick and black. Eleanor stood at the window, tea cooling in her hand, and watched the townsfolk hurry about their errands, umbrellas, laughter, chatter. She used to be part of that rhythm once, when her days had shape and purpose. Back when the smell of baking meant home, not memory. She could still remember the sound of Frank's laugh in the bakery, the low warmth of it blending with the clatter of trays. "Patience, Elle," he'd say whenever she fretted over dough that wouldn't rise. "The best things take time." Time. How cruelly it had proven him right. Her gaze drifted across the street to Sweet Eden Patisserie. Even through the rain, the gold lettering gleamed. She could see shapes moving inside Abigail's silhouette, tall and confident, her hands gesturing as she spoke to customers. The girl had charm, Eleanor had to admit. A predator's kind of charm. She'd been much younger then, that first summer Abigail Langley walked into her bakery. So pretty, so full of compliments. "Oh, Mrs. Vance, your pastries taste like heaven," she'd said, her smile soft as butter. And Eleanor, foolish with pride and exhaustion, had believed every word. Abigail had come back every day after that. Always curious. Always kind. Until one morning, she'd brought Martin with her, polite, unassuming, the type of man who smiled without ever revealing what he was thinking. "We'd love to help you modernize," he'd said, sipping her coffee as though it belonged to him. "Partnerships are how small businesses survive these days." Partnership. The words still made her stomach tighten. The papers had been clean, the signatures neat, the betrayal absolute. And through it all, Abigail's face had remained lovely and calm, like a saint's painted in sugar and gold leaf. The rain eased outside, tapering to a whisper. The afternoon light dulled to silver, soft against the tiles. Eleanor closed the jar, set it beside the mixing bowl, and sat down again. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her pen. Beneath the list of names she wrote, "Revenge requires the same patience as bread. It must rise on its own time." She read the sentence twice, then closed the book. The house seemed to hold its breath. The air smelled faintly of almond and damp wood. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, as though the house itself were shifting in approval. Eleanor rose, her back stiff, and looked once more out the window. Sweet Eden's lights glowed softly against the dusk. She imagined the warmth inside, the laughter, the lies. "They thought I'd forgotten," she whispered. "They mistook mercy for memory." The clock struck 6. The sound filled the small kitchen like the tolling of a distant bell. Eleanor smiled. Patience, she thought again. She had nothing but time. And time, at last, was hungry. The rain cleared by morning, leaving the town washed and glistening. The sky was a soft gray, the color of old tin, and the air smelled faintly of damp leaves and sugar from the cafe down the road. Eleanor watched Rosehill awaken through her window, the same cobblestone street, the same flickering lamppost that never kept time, the same bakery across the way with its golden sign catching the light. She hadn't stepped inside Sweet Eden since the day her name came off the window. But that morning, something in her, that quiet, simmering place she'd been tending like a secret pot, began to stir. It began with a sound. A laugh, sharp and honeyed, carried across the street as the door to the bakery swung open. Abigail Langley stepped out, radiant as ever in her crisp white coat, her hair coiled in that effortless bun Eleanor used to envy. She was speaking to a delivery boy, her tone light, musical, as she pointed at boxes stacked in the van. Eleanor felt her heart clench, not with fear, but recognition. That same voice had once called her "Darling Eleanor," had once promised friendship and partnership, had once thanked her for trust. She'd believed every word. Now, as she stood unseen behind her lace curtains, she felt a strange calm descend. It wasn't anger anymore, anger burned too fast. This was something else. Something cold and exact. She dressed deliberately, pulling her wool coat over her cardigan, pinning her brooch at the collar. The air outside bit at her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. The walk to the bakery felt both familiar and foreign, the same distance she'd crossed 1,000 times before, but each step now carried the weight of years. When she reached the corner, she stopped. From here, she could see Abigail arranging pastries in the window display, glossy eclairs, jewel-toned macarons, lemon tarts dusted with sugar fine as frost. The perfection of it all sickened her. She was about to turn away when Abigail looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. Eleanor felt time fold in on itself. For a heartbeat, they were back in that first year, the young woman full of ideas and admiration, the older woman basking in attention she didn't realize was hunger in disguise. Then, recognition flickered in Abigail's face. Surprise. Politeness. Pity. She smiled, that same wide, practiced smile that had fooled so many. "Eleanor! Is that really you?" The voice broke through the glass as she pushed the door open, the scent of sugar and butter rushing out to greet her like deceit wrapped in perfume. Abigail came toward her, hands outstretched. "It's been years. You look wonderful." Eleanor smiled thinly. "Do I? That's kind of you, Abigail. You've done well for yourself." "Oh, we've been lucky." Abigail brushed a non-existent crumb from her apron. "It's hard work, of course, but worth it. The mayor's gala next month, can you imagine? Sweet Eden is catering the whole thing." Eleanor's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You must be very proud. I wish Frank could see it," Abigail said softly, as though the name were hers to use. "He'd be proud too, don't you think?" Eleanor's throat tightened. Frank was proud of honesty. Of good work done with clean hands. The words hung between them like smoke. For a moment, the bright shop seemed to dim. Abigail blinked, her smile faltering. Well, she said quickly, you should come to the gala. I'll make sure you get a front row seat. You can tell us what you think of our new truffles, inspired by one of your old recipes, actually. Eleanor tilted her head. How flattering. Isn't it? Abigail beamed, missing the venom in her tone. We've just perfected the balance of sweet and bitter. You always said contrast is key. Eleanor stared at her, the words echoing through her mind like a bell tolling from far away. Sweet and bitter. Contrast is key. I did say that, she murmured. When she left, the air outside felt colder than before. She walked home slowly, each step deliberate, her reflection catching in the puddles like pieces of someone else's life. By the time she reached her gate, her hands were trembling. She told herself it was the cold, but deep down, she knew better. Inside, the house felt smaller, heavier. The ticking clock seemed louder, the air thicker with cinnamon and dust. She removed her coat, hung it on the same hook it had always occupied, and went straight to the kitchen. The recipe book still sat on the table. She opened it to the list of names, her gaze falling on the first one. Abigail Langley. Beneath it, she wrote, The Mayor's Gala, Opportunity. Her pen moved again, steady now. Revenge need not shout. It can whisper, like sugar dissolving in tea. She sat back, staring at the ink. The letters looked strange, alive somehow, as though they'd been waiting years to be written. Her thoughts drifted to the gala, the crowd, the speeches, the trays of perfect desserts gliding through the room. She imagined Abigail, her laughter filling the air, her confidence gleaming like the glass cases of her shop. And then she imagined it breaking. Not with violence, not with blood, but with the simple, exquisite crack of fear. The kind that begins quietly, a tremor in the hand, a sour taste on the tongue, a sudden question of safety. Eleanor smiled. Not out of cruelty, but out of purpose. For the first time in years, she felt something alive moving within her, the pulse of creation. Only this time, it was not bread she was leavening. She stood, went to the pantry, and touched each jar on the shelf. Sugar, salt, nutmeg, vanilla, cocoa. Her fingertips left faint prints in the dust. So many ingredients. So many possibilities. At the very back sat a small, unmarked vial. The glass was clouded, the contents dark amber. She had kept it for decades, an experiment never repeated. Bitter almond extract, concentrated, is dangerous in careless hands. She lifted it carefully, feeling its weight. A scent escaped, sweet, deceptive, with that faint metallic edge of something forbidden. Eleanor closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw Frank smiling over a tray of tarts. She saw herself younger, gentler. She saw everything she had lost. When she opened her eyes again, they were steady. Sweet and bitter, she whispered. Yes, Abigail. You always did love contrast. Outside, the church bells began to chime, slow and heavy. Eleanor returned the vial to its place, the decision already taking root inside her. Revenge, she thought, was like baking. It began not with anger, but with patience, a quiet gathering of ingredients, a slow stirring of purpose. And once it began to rise, nothing could stop it. The world outside had turned brittle with frost. Each morning, Eleanor woke to windows glazed with white breath, to air sharp enough to sting her throat. She moved slower now, her joints rebelling with every step, but she welcomed the ache. Pain, she thought, was proof she was still capable of feeling something other than regret. Her kitchen had become a workshop again. Not the cheerful, bustling bakery of her past, but something quieter, almost sacred. Every tool had its place, the old copper bowl, the rolling pin with its smooth, worn handles, the spice jars arranged like little soldiers along the shelf. Even the air had changed. It no longer smelled simply of cinnamon and sugar, but of calculation, of something being built. On the table lay her notebook, open to a fresh page. Across the top, in her steady hand, she had written, Recipe for retribution, batch I. Below a list, half ingredients, half intention. Dark chocolate, 200 grams for temptation. Cream, 100 milliliters for softness. Butter, just enough to bind what cannot stay together. Bitter almond extract, measured with care, for memory. Patience, as much as it takes. The words looked absurd and beautiful side by side, a prayer disguised as a recipe. Eleanor smiled faintly. It had always been this way, creation and destruction sharing the same bowl. She moved carefully as she worked, her motions slow but sure. Chocolate melting over a low flame, the scent rich and heady. Steam rose in soft tendrils that caught the lamplight like whispers. The copper bowl gleamed dully beneath her hands, reflecting fragments of her face, a mouth set in determination, eyes unreadable. Her fingers still knew the rhythm, even after all these years: stir, fold, test, taste. The texture of the mixture changed beneath her spoon, growing thicker, darker, alive. When she lifted the vial of almond extract, she hesitated. The scent escaped as soon as the cork came loose, sweet, almost innocent, but beneath it lingered a note like burned metal. The memory of her mother's warning echoed in her mind. Too much of it will stop the heart, Ellie. Never trust anything that smells too sweet. Eleanor dipped the spoon lightly, added 2 drops, then paused, staring at the amber liquid trembling at the edge of the vial. Not poison, she whispered to the empty room. Just a reminder. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet, calm, deliberate, unafraid. She replaced the cork and stirred, watching the dark mixture swallow the scent whole. For a moment, she forgot about revenge. The act of creation consumed her, the feel of the wooden spoon, the rhythm of the whisk, the hum of the gas flame. She was back in the bakery again, Frank humming beside her, sunlight glancing off trays of croissants. She could almost hear him say, "Don't rush it, love. Let the sweetness rise on its own time." But then his voice faded, and the silence returned. The smell of chocolate filled the air, thick and intoxicating. Eleanor spooned the mixture into a tray, smoothing each portion with precision. 48 perfect truffles. They gleamed under the lamp, innocent and exquisite. She stared at them, her reflection fragmented in their glossy surfaces. They were beautiful, too beautiful. She felt a flicker of unease, something fragile and human stirring beneath the calm. Frank would have hated this. He believed in kindness the way priests believed in God. "You'd forgive them," she said quietly to the air. "You'd say time would take care of it." But time hadn't. It had only sharpened what was left of her. She placed the tray in the fridge to cool. When she closed the door, her face appeared faintly in the metal surface, pale, serious, eyes ringed with the soft bruises of sleeplessness. Not a monster, she thought. Not yet. The rest of the day passed in ritual. She cleaned the counters, labeled each jar, swept the floor, boiled water for tea she didn't drink. Her every motion was methodical, meditative. She knew she couldn't rush this. The gala was still 2 weeks away. There was time to test, to refine, to perfect. In the evening, as the sky bruised into violet and the first snow began to fall, a knock came at the door. 3 short taps. It was the delivery boy, Tom. Polite, soft-spoken, barely 20. He stood there with his cap in hand, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Vance. I was making a delivery for Sweet Eden and thought I'd check if you needed anything from the grocer tomorrow." Eleanor smiled gently, the kind of smile that had disarmed people her entire life. "You're very thoughtful, Tom. Come in a moment, warm yourself before you catch your death." He hesitated, then stepped inside, his breath still visible in the air. She offered him a cup of tea, the real kind, no bitterness hidden inside, and a biscuit from an old tin. He accepted both with shy gratitude. "These are amazing," he said after the first bite. "Mrs. Langley says no one bakes like you anymore." Eleanor's lips curved. "Mrs. Langley says many things?" He laughed awkwardly, not understanding. "She's got me running all over town for that mayor's gala. Says it'll put Sweet Eden on the map." Eleanor stirred her tea slowly. "Oh, I imagine it will." She learned a lot in those few minutes, The gala date, the menu, and the storage arrangements at the bakery. The delivery schedule. All of it offered freely, innocently, by a boy who saw only a kind old woman with kind old eyes. When he left, she stood by the door, watching his figure disappear into the dusk. Her hands trembled slightly as she locked the door, not from guilt, but from anticipation. Back in the kitchen, she opened her notebook and wrote, neat and deliberate. Step 1. Establish opportunity. Gala confirmed. Step 2. Refine dosage. Step 3. Deliver beauty wrapped in sin. Her handwriting was small but steady. Beneath it, she added a final line, one that made her pause as she read it back. Old hands, sharp mind. Still capable. She closed the notebook and turned out the light. In the darkness, the scent of chocolate lingered, sweet, heavy, and faintly bitter, the smell of memory reborn into something else entirely. Eleanor stood there a long time, her pulse slow, her thoughts clear as glass. Outside, the first snows settled over Rose Hill, white and pure, covering everything, even sins, in silence. The night of the gala arrived cloaked in frost and quiet expectation. Eleanor Vance stood before her mirror, fastening the clasp of a plum-colored coat she had not worn in years. The fabric felt heavy with history, the faint scent of cedar still clinging to it. Beneath her collar, she pinned her mother's brooch, a silver rose, tarnished but unbroken. It seemed fitting. Outside, the street shimmered under thin snow. Every lamppost along Rose Hill Lane glowed with a halo of light, and distant music drifted from the town hall where the mayor's annual winter gala was already underway. Eleanor could see the golden shimmer of it from her window, could hear faint laughter rising like smoke into the night. She closed her notebook, the last page filled, the plan complete, and tucked it beneath the drawer of her kitchen table. Then she opened the pantry, and retrieved the small tin hidden behind jars of sugar and tea leaves. Inside, nestled like jewels, were the truffles, dark, smooth, and flawless. Her masterpiece. Her offering. Her retribution. Each one glistened faintly under the kitchen light, as if alive. She had tested the proportions, measured the essence to the precise drop, enough to unsettle, never to destroy. She wanted them to taste the fear she had swallowed for years, the slow, creeping kind that lingers after the sweetness fades. She wrapped the tin carefully in brown paper and tied it with string, her movements calm and precise. Not trembling now. Not uncertain. This was her element, the stillness before the oven door opens, the pause before creation reveals itself. When she stepped outside, the cold bit through her gloves, but she barely felt it. The walk to the town hall was short, and as she went, she passed the darkened storefront of Sweet Eden. Its windows were unlit, its gold lettering dulled by frost. Even its perfection looked hollow now. She smiled faintly as she walked on. The mayor's gala glowed like a cathedral. Candles flickered in tall glass holders, their flames mirrored in polished floors. The air smelled of champagne, silk, and expensive perfume, too sweet, too artificial. And at the center of it all stood Abigail Langley. Radiant, confident, untouchable. Her sequin dress caught the light like 1,000 tiny blades, her laughter carrying across the room with practiced charm. Martin was beside her, his arm around her waist, his smile stretched thin. Eleanor lingered at the edge of the crowd, invisible in her age and quietness. That was the advantage of being old, people looked past you. You became part of the background, a fixture rather than a threat. Mrs. Vance! Abigail's voice sliced through the hum of conversation like the crack of a whip. You came! I can't tell you how thrilled I am. Eleanor smiled, small and deliberate. I couldn't resist. It's not every day one's legacy takes center stage. Oh, nonsense, Abigail said, taking her arm as though they were dear friends. We built on your foundation, that's all. You should be proud, your recipes live on through us. Ah, Eleanor said, her tone mild. So do ghosts. Abigail blinked, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. But there were guests watching, cameras flashing, and so she laughed, brittle, charming, hollow. Come, she said brightly. You must try the truffles. Our new signature dessert. I had them brought out just for tonight. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward the silver trays being arranged on the long banquet table, 24 perfect spheres dusted with cocoa, gleaming beneath the chandelier. She set down her own small parcel beside them, unnoticed amid the bustle. It blended seamlessly, her creation among theirs, indistinguishable. The mayor clinked his glass. Speeches began. Toasts followed. Abigail preened beside him, radiant with triumph. When the applause came, it was thunderous. And then the trays began to circulate. The first truffles disappeared quickly, guests humming with delight. Compliments rose in waves. Heavenly! So rich! You've outdone yourselves! Eleanor stood by the window, watching it unfold through the faint reflection of her own face. She didn't need to see who ate which piece. She only needed to wait. The first sign came quietly, a cough from one of the councilmen. Then a hand pressed to the stomach. Then another guest, a woman in a fur stole, blinking rapidly, her complexion paling beneath the golden light. Murmurs spread through the crowd, small and confused. Laughter faltered. The music continued, absurdly cheerful, as the mood began to curdle. Abigail noticed first. She turned, frowning, her perfect smile fracturing. Is everything all right? The mayor's wife dabbed her lips with a napkin, her hand shaking slightly. Just a strange aftertaste, she said faintly. Too bitter, perhaps? Martin's laughter broke like glass. Probably the cream, he muttered. Maybe too rich. But his voice cut off as he swayed slightly, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Panic is a delicate thing, it begins as silence. Then it grows. Within minutes, the room shifted. Waiters hurried. Guests whispered. Someone opened a window. Cold air swept in, scattering the scent of chocolate and perfume. Abigail stood frozen, her hands trembling against her sequined skirt. And then she saw her. Eleanor stood in the corner calm, her gloved hands folded neatly around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Their eyes met across the chaos, Abigail's wide with confusion and dread, Eleanor's steady, almost gentle. In that single look, Abigail understood. Eleanor saw the knowledge bloom behind her eyes, not guilt, not remorse, but terror. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, a grandmother's nod, tender and cruel all at once. Then she turned away. By the time the first ambulance siren echoed faintly through the night, Eleanor was already halfway home. Her breath fogged the cold air. Her boots crunched through the snow. The sound of panic faded behind her, replaced by the familiar rhythm of her heart. She felt no triumph, only an enormous quiet. When she reached her kitchen, she removed her gloves and placed them neatly beside the sink. The house was warm again, smelling faintly of cocoa and dust. On the table sat a single truffle she had saved for herself, untainted, pure. She picked it up, held it between her fingers, and smiled softly. To Patience, she whispered, raising it slightly toward the empty chair across from her. Frank's chair. Then she bit into it. The taste was divine, dark, rich, perfectly balanced between sweet and bitter. Tears pricked her eyes as she swallowed, though she wasn't sure why. Relief, perhaps. Or sorrow. The two were twins now, inseparable. Outside, the snow fell heavily, muting the world to silence. And Eleanor Vance sat alone in her kitchen, the ghost of chocolate on her tongue, the sound of the clock filling the space where her heart used to ache. For the first time in years, she felt full. And yet, in some quiet, unreachable part of her, she knew the hunger would return. Because revenge, like sweetness, never truly satisfies. It only teaches the tongue to crave what should have been left to bitterness. Morning came gray and soft, the kind of light that made the world look faded, unfinished. Eleanor Vance stood at her window, hands curled around a cup of tea gone cold, and watched Rosehill wake to its gossip. The news had spread faster than frost, whispers at the grocer's, murmurs outside the post office, speculations that twisted like smoke. Something went wrong at the gala. Half the town's elite took sick. It was the cream, they say, or maybe the chocolate. Sweet Eden hadn't opened that morning. Its windows stayed dark, Its door locked, the proud gold lettering on its sign dulled by a thin film of ice. Eleanor felt no triumph, only quiet inevitability, as if the universe had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. She set her tea down and drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The house hummed faintly, the clock ticking, the pipes sighing, but beneath it all was silence. That new kind of silence she'd earned, the one that came after everything else had been spoken. She had thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. Instead, it felt like the moments after a storm, calm, but heavy. The air smelled faintly of cocoa and metal, a ghost of the night before. She found herself listening for Frank, the laugh that used to roll through this house, the hum that used to steady her nerves. But there was only the sound of her own breath, steady, shallow, human. She moved to the kitchen, her sanctuary and her crime scene both. The truffle tin sat empty now, its paper lining stained faintly dark. She traced the rim of it with her fingertip, as though she could still feel the heartbeat of what she'd done pulsing there. Through the window, a figure crossed the street, young Tom, the delivery boy, his collar turned up against the cold. He paused outside Sweet Eden, peering through the frosted glass before shaking his head and walking on. For a moment, guilt fluttered weakly in Eleanor's chest. Not for Abigail, not for Martin, but for innocence brushed by consequence. Tom had been kind. Unwitting. She would not let his name join the others written in her book. Speaking of which, her eyes turned to the drawer under the table. The old notebook lay there, the same one that had begun as a ledger of sweetness and ended as a record of sin. She pulled it out slowly, running her fingers along its cracked leather cover. The pages inside still smelled faintly of vanilla and age. When she opened it, her list of names stared back at her like ghosts that refused to fade. Abigail Langley, Martin Langley, Harold Brinley, Beatrice Horn. Each crossed out with the same deliberate stroke. Eleanor studied the ink. Each line was both a sentence and an absolution. She sat there a long time, the light shifting across the table, until finally she reached for the matches on the mantel. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the ache of time itself. She struck the match and held its flame above the page. It caught quickly, the fire curling through the paper with a hiss like whispered secrets. The smoke rose slow and fragrant, vanilla, ink, sugar, ash. It drifted upward and faded into the rafters, leaving behind nothing but a blackened edge. When it was done, she whispered, "Enough." The word lingered, fragile but true. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. 3 gentle knocks. She hesitated before answering. When she did, Tom stood there, his expression uncertain. "Morning, Mrs. Vance," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "I just came to check if you'd heard about the Langleys. Mrs. Langley's been taken ill, nothing fatal, thank God, but bad enough they're leaving town. Closing up shop." Eleanor nodded. "Yes, I heard." He shifted awkwardly. "Some folks are saying it's bad luck. Others think it's just karma." He smiled, embarrassed. "My mom always said what goes around comes around." Eleanor's own smile was faint. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "Yeah," he said softly. "Anyway, I thought you'd want to know. You were close once, weren't you?" "For a time," she said. "Long ago." Tom tipped his cap. "Well, take care, Mrs. Vance. It's freezing out here." When he left, the cold rushed in behind him, clean, sharp, bracing. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, watching the snow gather on the porch steps before she closed the door. The world was quieter now. Rosehill had already begun its forgetting, as small towns do. By spring, someone else would buy the bakery. The sign would come down, painted over, replaced by new ambitions and fresh lies. But Eleanor knew, some stains never truly washed out. Some sweetness was built on ruin. That evening she baked. Not for vengeance this time. Not even for memory. Just to feel warmth again. She tied her apron, rolled up her sleeves, and let the rhythm take her. Flour dusted the air, soft as snow. Butter melted beneath her fingers. The scent of cinnamon rose once more, curling through the house, but this time it didn't smell of loss. It smelled of life, fragile and fleeting. When the oven bell rang, she opened the door and breathed in deeply. The heat flushed her cheeks, the smell filled her chest. She placed the tray on the counter and sat beside it, her cup of tea steaming at her elbow. Through the window, night descended, slow, deliberate, silver against the rooftops. Across the street, Sweet Eden stood empty, its reflection pale in the frost. Eleanor lifted one of the cooling pastries and broke it in half. Steam rose like a blessing. She took a bite. It was simple. Sweet. Honest. Her eyes drifted to the empty chair across from her, Frank's chair. "I think I understand now," she murmured. "Kindness isn't weakness, love. It's what you return to, after." The clock ticked softly. The house exhaled. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing Rose Hill in quiet forgiveness. And in the kitchen where she had baked her vengeance and her absolution alike, Eleanor Vance finally rested, not as a victim, not as a monster, but as a woman who had lived long enough to taste the difference between justice and peace. The scent of cinnamon lingered in the air, not bitter this time, not sweet. Just enough to remind her that every ending, no matter how dark, can cool into silence. They thought age had made her harmless, that time had softened her heart, dulled her edges, and tamed her hands. But Eleanor Vance had simply learned what the young never do. That the sweetest revenge is not served hot or cold, but slowly, baked in silence, measured in patience, and tasted only when the past can no longer bite back. And when the last crumb of vengeance was gone, what lingered was not victory, but peace, warm as cinnamon, and twice as fleeting.